Look, can we all just admit that we're sick and tired of hearing about Christian Horner? Well, okay, Toto Wolff isn't sick of it. You could easily say he's making the most of something that Christian Horner doesn't have, but he does. Ever since the 2021 season, the bosses of Red Bull and Mercedes have confronted one another for one thing or another. As noted most famously in that heated exchange in Drive to Survive, where they were talking about cars and emails and printing it out and... You get the idea. All the hard graft that Red Bull had been putting into making sure that their car could beat Mercedes paid off, and since then, it's been solid gravy throughout the entire experience of the ground effect era. As we all know, Mercedes couldn't really find a solution in the ground effect era, and thusly they were subject to the porpoising situation. They then lobbied to get the rules modified for their own benefit, and then that didn't work, and then they've basically been floundering around trying to figure out why they're not the best. But suddenly, they're now starting to get over that, and are now starting to come up with a plan. And now, based on all of the stuff that's been going on, Toto Wolff seems quite assured, and quite happy to watch the Red Bull world burn whilst he is quite, content. Maybe he's managed to get a new supplier of pumpernickel, who knows. Yes, the W15 seems to have more potential than the previous two models, but the drivers are still saying that there is work to be done, and according to some racing pundits, you know the ones, Ralf Schumacher, Eddie Jordan, kind of makes me miss Jacques Villeneuve in a way in his acerbic comments. Even DC's getting in on the act on this one. Lewis has effectively checked out of Mercedes, and he's already moved his mindset over to Ferrari for next year, as have probably most of the fandom. Despite this latest Mercedes car being more suited to his driving style, Lewis having more of an input into the car's development than ever before, it's still not really giving him the results that he wants right from the get-go. And according to this piece from Racing News 365, it could be something to do with the fact that Lewis Hamilton is spending far too much time in free practice experimenting with setups to get the ideal solution that he wants, instead of just getting on with the business and coming up with a setup that will go, that'll do, and then just trying to make the most out of what you got. Needless to say, Mercedes are going through a transition, where they are realizing that they are no longer the world champions, and that it's going to take a while for them to get back up to the top, with George Russell leading the way, and the Lewis Hamilton era coming towards an end. And I'll leave you a link to this video about why I think Mercedes could thrive without Lewis around. Red Bull, operationally though, have been remarkable, breaking records left, right and centre. On an operational level, the trackside staff, all of the mechanics, everyone putting that car together, as well as the drivers, it's been sensational. And that should be respected and acknowledged. Up until probably the middle of last year, it looked absolutely rock solid for Red Bull. Nothing could go wrong. But then the aftermath of the death of Dietrich Mateschitz came into play, the architect of all things Red Bull and Formula One, this being his baby, and Formula One in his mind being yet another extension of what Red Bull became synonymous for, being involved in extreme sports, and also being seen as the party boys. There was the main team, and then there was the second team to train up junior drivers to then get up to the top team. Simple as, clearly defined. But now that he's no longer with us, that definition has sort of become muddied and almost irrelevant, and now almost annoying. The tone at Red Bull has changed, and it's proven not to be a very good tone, and it's something that Toto Wolff and everyone else up and down the grid is watching with bated breath. Could this be the only way that Red Bull falls? Not on the track? I may be wanting more drivers to win races, but I wouldn't want Red Bull's domination to end like this. Now, I must be absolutely clear here. The situation around the investigation has been absolutely sloppy. The lack of transparency from all concerned is shockingly bad. This needs to be brought out and showcased to people, and there needs to be a clear dialogue going on where everybody comes up with a good conclusion and everybody is satisfied with the result. And not to mention, you should feel comfortable for whoever you're working for, and that you shouldn't feel threatened or nervous or intimidated in any way. Say what you will about the likes of Gunther Steiner. One of his main mantras is that he wanted to make sure that he got on well with everybody. He didn't care who you were, so long as you were a hard worker, that was okay with him. Which is why everyone at Haas viewed Gunther Steiner as one of the best bosses they ever had. Even though it didn't translate to on-track results most of the time, from a managerial level, Gunther Steiner was one of the best. It's just a shame he took on far too many roles and he spread himself too thin, doing stuff that he wasn't necessarily an expert at. As for Christian Horner, I feel like the reason why you get former drivers like Christian Albers stating that the power he wields at Red Bull being terrifying is all part of his plan after Mateschitz' death, to become a fully fledged manufacturer team that is ruled by himself, like Ferrari and Mercedes, and of course make their outfits more efficient and making a lot more money. With most situations like this, you tend to see this in media everywhere. Whenever somebody of significance passes away and they have a really big estate or they have a substantial amount of wealth, there's usually a bit of a power grab as to who gets what in the will. Is the will abided by? Or is there a little bit of a power play if there's a lack of transparency or dialogue or clarity? Therefore, people are scrapping for the remainders and trying to come out on top. And this is exactly what we are seeing right here, between Christian Horner and the Thai side of the business, and Oliver Mintzlaff and Jos Verstappen on the other side of the business. One thing's for sure, the original mantra of Red Bull that the original CEO manifested is slowly being eroded away, and within the space of not even 18 months after his passing, it's almost completely gone. Christian Horner has leaned into that situation of being seen as the renegades, the rogues. That's why this year their catchphrase and tagline is Forever Rebel, because they are seen as the bad boys, they're the party animals, they are the pantomime villains. Christian Horner being dubbed as a pantomime villain, to which he is actually quite partial to and is okay with. Since he has been the team principal for nearly 20 years at this point, and he's been very close with Dietrich Mateschitz throughout the majority of it, he has basically felt like Red Bull and he are pretty much synonymous, that whatever happens with him or the success that he has had, he is pretty much untouchable. But with Mateschitz no longer there, one of Christian Horner's major allies, and the new CEO Oliver Mintzlaff coming in, being sort of reticent and not really inclined to the bad boy mentality of Red Bull, Mintzlaff wants everybody to like Red Bull. But let's be real here, Oliver. You're not going to get every single Formula 1 fan liking you. Unless you're Williams, of course. And according to some insiders, Mintzlaff is being poised to be redeployed as the new team principal or boss of the racing team should Horner either be sacked or forced to retire. Whether or not he would then continue to be the CEO of the drinks company as well, that hasn't really been made clear yet. But one thing is for sure here, is that there is a power play going on between the Austrian arm of the business and the Thai side of the business, in the wake of Dietrich Mateschitz' death. There was a clear definition as to what the Red Bull F1 team meant throughout the entire portfolio of Red Bull. Now that Mateschitz is no longer there, Red Bull is seen as a very profitable arm of the business, and really should come under more of the control of the drinks company itself. It's sort of what we're seeing at Ferrari at the moment, with John Elkann taking more of an interest as to the goings-on amongst Ferrari, and him being a dab hand at getting Lewis Hamilton to join them for 2025, something I talk about in this video right here. Ferrari's $6 billion driver owns the F1 team. They are taking more of an interest to make sure that it remains profitable, in good reputation. And considering what's happening with Christian Horner, it's bringing this into a bit of disrepute and making F1 not look quite as harmonious. And therefore, I think the Austrian arm is starting to lose patience with what Christian Horner is doing and the original plan of making themselves a fully fledged manufacturer, what with the powertrains business and making sure they can make pretty much everything in-house. They're looking for a change in a way, despite all the success that Horner has brought them, ever since their first podium with David Coulthard in Monaco, with that Superman cape. Yeah, history has not aged that well, has it? But having said that though, with that jawline, DC back then would have made a good Superman. Horner is making use of his current influence and goodwill with the Thai side of the company to consolidate as much of the racing team under his belt as possible to lay down his ideal image of Red Bull racing for the future, in case he either retires early or is unceremoniously deposed. It's all about the legacy. And it all stems back to the height of Red Bull's first term of success, back in the early 2010s, when Sebastian Vettel and Red Bull were dominating absolutely everybody. Despite that though, Red Bull were not a fully fledged manufacturer team. They were a privateer, customer works team under the guise of Renault. And as we all know, that relationship soured very quickly once the turbo hybrid era kicked in, and it got so bad between Christian Horner and Cyril Abiteboul, they basically rebadged the engine of Renault under Tag Heuer, one of their major sponsors. It got that petulant that, despite that being a Renault engine, they named it after a watch company. And then the door was left wide open for Mercedes to come in and create a monster of an engine and romp to uncontested domination for multiple years. And only when Renault was dropped could Red Bull start to claw its way back to the top, with its relationship with Honda. Of course, we saw throughout 2017, 18, 19 Ferrari claw their way back somewhat, Sebastian Vettel offering some kind of title contest at the beginning, but then, as what happened with 2020 after that oil burn dispute or something, Ferrari fell back off again, with Red Bull being seemingly the only possible challengers left, with Honda power. And then of course Honda bailed on F1 and then unbailed itself again, realizing that, oh wait, we won a championship, oh that didn't happen, do over. They're coming back into F1 with Aston Martin, But their engines are still already here, rebadged as Red Bull powertrains, and then they become Red Bull powertrains, and yeah, Honda just made this extremely messy, didn't they? So they've got two types of engines in a way. And as we all remember from Red Bull powertrains, they were able to get successfully an engine freeze. That means they could then develop their own powertrains unit. That was a little bit of a hot potato that Christian Horner was successfully able to implement. Therefore, not really getting himself in the good books amongst all of the other team principals and teams. So, again, more discord going on. But the dream for Christian Horner would be to make Red Bull a fully fledged team in its own right that basically could make everything. They could make the engine with the support of Ford, they can make the battery unit of things, and they wouldn't have to rely on many major outside external influences when it comes to how the car runs. And oh yes, eventually, then they can then hire out their Red Bull powertrains to different teams and manufacturers to get that little bit of extra cash and of course a little bit of indirect R&D time with other teams running their own engines. I still find it really funny the ironic twist that Ford has come back to Red Bull even though Red Bull bought the team from Ford 20 years ago. But then of course this costs money. So what do you do to get that little bit of extra cash? Because that Oracle sponsorship, that can only get you so far. So, thinks Horner, we've got the second team that really isn't pulling its own weight. AlphaTauri was really not bringing in the big sponsorship money, so why don't we make the most, get Peter Bayer in, and then start marketing that team to the highest bidder, that in the case of being Visa and Cash App, so therefore more money can be invested. That means that team is basically just a big fat billboard until somebody buys the team outright. Basically, they'll have an attitude to capitalize on the fact that this team is worth over $1 billion already and could be very lucrative with more sponsors, as well as bringing everything closer to Milton Keynes in terms of an operational level. Make things more efficient and thusly less expensive. That means you don't really have to transport as much to Faenza. You can just have a token vestigial tail left out there for mostly admin and some little bits and pieces that don't require too much money. Then of course you got the sponsor-friendly Daniel Ricciardo, him being a very big favourite of Christian Horner, and then you give assurances to anyone sponsoring Racing Bulls that there's going to be a closer alignment to the top team, which is currently the best team on the grid, and then you're absolutely gravy. Yes, this does have a nice benefit, which means that Red Bull, the drinks company, isn't sinking nearly as much money into the outfit, meaning that it can stand on its own 2 feet and can have some sort of independence, which again is something that Christian Horner really wants, to showcase that Red Bull's not just piling money in left, right and centre, but at the same time, it does run the risk of adding sort of an empire under the Red Bull brand, that Christian Horner, this is his team, because he did used to run a team, Arden, before Red Bull plucked him out, and therefore he's seen things unfold. Things are maturing. Red Bull's in a good place, so therefore you want to make sure it stays in a good place. Therefore, you put in everything that you see would be the ideal solution. If one day you choose to retire, you can leave things in good hands, Red Bull is self-sustaining, and therefore you don't have to worry about its long-term future. It can remain profitable, it can remain self-sufficient. But this is the thing that kind of happens when you leave one person in charge as a figurehead of a Formula One team. If that singular person gets into a little bit of hot water, no matter what it is, it can then destabilize of sorts the entire team. And all of this happens so fast, coupled with the investigation, it's led to his control being tested and almost being taken away from him. And this is where Toto's assuredness and turning of the screw comes into play. In the midst of all of this has kind of brought Formula One into disrepute, and Stefano Domenicali, the boss of Formula One, has even gotten in on the action. But at the same time, all the other team principals are looking to this and thinking, is this the only way that Red Bull could be destabilized and we might have a chance of catching up? Because on an operational level, the cars, they're not going to catch up anytime soon. That bit is absolutely fine. But from the administrative level, things from the top down could easily rot, and over time, in the medium term, it could trickle down towards the 2026 development. Despite all the control that Christian Horner has of the Red Bull racing operation, he doesn't own any shares of it or Red Bull, the drinks company itself. That is shared between the Thai side and the Austrian side. The difference between he and Toto is that Toto does own Mercedes. He owns a third of the widget. 1/3 being owned by Mercedes themselves, and the other third being owned by Jim Ratcliffe's Ineos company. With this level of control, there's already a power hierarchy which is clearly defined, and Toto's ability to calmly watch as Red Bull burn is quite an important thing to take into consideration. Throughout the struggles of the ground effect era, Toto Wolff's not felt threatened at all. He's not likely to get fired because he is a major shareholder of the entire team. Therefore, that pressure is not on his shoulders. That means they can quietly get on with the business of trying to figure things out. With Christian Horner not having that, he is being employed by Red Bull. He is there at the grace of Red Bull GmbH. So therefore, If things start to go sour, and things don't go in the favour of Red Bull the company itself, be it on the Thai side or the Austrian side, Christian Horner's contract can easily be cut. Whereas with Toto, it's a little bit more complicated. Because even then, if he does leave, or he's forced to resign, he does end up having to sell up his shares, and he will be left a very, very rich man. Probably a billionaire. It also explains why Toto was quite vocal during the Vegas weekend and how he was very defensive of Formula One that day. In fact, throughout all of the discord that's been going on with Red Bull for nearly a month at this point, Toto Wolff has been quite chilled, relaxed. In fact, he's been talking about the changed mindset at Mercedes, how there's far less pressure going on, that they know they will be able to turn it around eventually, and they'll get on top of all of the problems, the fundamental issues that the W15 has. There doesn't seem to be this level of desperation to try and change things quickly, like they did last year, with that letter in Bahrain, as well as external pressure from the fans. Right now, you get the feeling that Mercedes aren't really that bothered about what the fans think at the moment. Of course, they want to improve quickly, but they believe that they have the car that can improve fast. George Russell himself is quite satisfied. Lewis Hamilton on some days is satisfied with the car, but on some days it leads to a lack of performance. But you feel like the mood at Mercedes is not as dire as it was last year, even though the results are not as good as last year, if not slightly worse, because right now they are fourth in the constructors, but you feel like they have got some sort of path towards a brighter future coming down. Maybe that's because they won't have the external pressure from Lewis Hamilton and his fans. Not really sure about that one. But then you've got the feeling that things are looking up already. And maybe Toto and Fernando Alonso are starting to get a bed in one another. Fernando's not stopping with all of these coy and cute little inferences about maybe he might be good at Mercedes, and him saying that, well, I'm the only available world champion next year, so Toto, give me a call, maybe? He's just testing up his options. In any case, I think Toto Wolff is taking a leaf out of Ross Brawn's book. He's looking at the bigger picture for the slightly longer term. Yes, in this era of the regulation cycle, they're not going to be winning races left, right, and centre. Okay, you can try and consolidate things to make things slightly better, but 2026 is the real watchword, and so far to rumours, Mercedes do seem to have a really good power unit under their belts. But now they just need to get their heads around the aerodynamic side, and then they might be quite competitive. So you just get the feeling that Toto is being a little bit more content. He's not as stressed out as he has been. And with all the stuff going down with Christian Horner and how he could be deposed, that's going to make Toto all the more relaxed, that he doesn't really have to worry about his job. He just has to think for the long term. The board is backing him. They no longer have the pressure of Lewis Hamilton, but they might have the pressure of Alonso fans and maybe Kimi Antonelli. You never know. But right now, you feel like Mercedes is not that worried about being fourth. Right now, you can see that Christian Horner is done with all of this. He is left stressed, haggard, and angry, baying for blood. And I bet there will be some more bloodletting to come in the next few weeks. More people might lose their jobs, you might see some more hasty decisions. And also, this might explain why the Porsche deal that Red Bull had, which went to the 11th hour, it was almost a done deal, suddenly collapsed. That something to do with the terms meant that Christian Horner's position as the team principal or his overall control might have been compromised in a way that he might not have liked. Therefore, it potentially collapsed. These are all speculative things and rumours, and I would have my tinfoil right now, but it's currently being used to make lunch. But again, this is just speculation and conjecture, just so you know. But one thing's for sure, Christian Horner right now is a hunted man. He is being backed into a corner, so you really got to be careful with what he does next. Sure, it's not going to affect the cars on track for the time being, and Max Verstappen's going to cruise to victory, or at least being near the top of the table, for quite a while now. The RB20 is just that good. But if things continue to get shaky or strained, or even worse, amongst the staff, then you might start to see the natural brain drain that tends to happen with the top team be accelerated ever more. It happens with Mercedes, it happens with Ferrari, it happened with Red Bull the first time around. It's a natural thing. Things start to get boring, predictable, stale. You might want more of a challenge. You might have been a junior employee at the beginning of it, and you might be wanting more of a challenge, or more of a senior position at another team. Mercedes suffered through all of that, and in a way they still are suffering. Jerome D'Ambrosio, somebody who was being lined to be Toto Wolff's successor, is now moving over to Ferrari. So it's still continuing, but if Fernando Alonso can be brought in, or if Toto can tempt some Red Bull staff who are disgruntled with all of the stuff that's going down to come over to them to have a much more harmonious experience, then that might be a way when Mercedes can recover, try and get some new junior young blood in there, and therefore they can rejuvenate themselves going into 2026. And I doubt that the 2025 performance for Red Bull is going to be suffering either, considering that the RB21 is pretty much developed already. But I feel like with 2026, if this keeps going and Horner just sticks to his guns, stays there for as long as possible, this might affect the team going into this new development cycle. Whether or not it'll affect them badly, or whether or not it just means that everybody can catch up, remains to be seen. But this level of uncertainty for this team, which looked completely bulletproof and perfect for the longest time, is a concerning one for anybody who is affiliated with that company. I don't want Red Bull to crumble this way. I would rather them be beaten in a straight-up fight for a title, in the traditional sense. I would rather that happen, and many Formula 1 fans would like that too. I don't want backroom politics getting in the way, because that's just not right. And I just want this investigation to be resolved, where everybody is satisfied and the right outcome comes. But whatever happens, Toto Wolff will be waiting in the wings to see what happens. And he does look a little bit calmer than he has done for the last couple of years, hasn't he? Especially if he can get the likes of Fernando Alonso to come on board for a couple of years before Antonelli is ready for the big time. And to find out why I think Fernando is milking this for all of its worth, a chance to drive for Mercedes, which he thought would never happen, go and watch this video next, because the antics the Spaniard gets up to are just remarkable and endearing. This Chad knows what he's doing.